We're bringing in younger talent with fresh perspectives." The words hung in the air between us like an invisible wall. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap as I processed what Bryce Lambert, our new CEO of exactly 2 weeks, had just said to me. His office still smelled of fresh paint, the walls now a trendy slate gray instead of the warm beige I'd grown accustomed to over 18 years. "I see," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "And when will this transition take place?" Bryce adjusted his designer glasses and checked his watch, a habit I'd already noticed during our limited interactions. At 34, he was young enough to be my son, with carefully styled hair and the confident demeanor of someone who'd never experienced real failure. "Today will be your last day, Denise. Human Resources has prepared your severance package." He slid a folder across his glass desk. 2-month salary, standard NDA, the usual formalities. I was 52 years old, a founding senior systems architect who had built Aurora Grid's entire infrastructure from the ground up. When Jake Thornton and I started this company in his basement nearly 2 decades ago, I wrote our first server configurations by hand. I designed every migration plan, coded every backup protocol, and architected the complex redundancy systems that kept our clients' data safe and secure. I didn't just build the IT backbone, I was the backbone. "Of course," I said, taking the folder. "Will there be a transition period? My systems are quite complex, and there's substantial undocumented architecture that might—" "We've assessed the situation," Bryce interrupted with a dismissive wave. "The team can reverse engineer anything they need. We're moving to cloud-native solutions anyway, more scalable, more agile." I nodded, suppressing a smile at his buzzword confidence. If he'd bothered to read any of my quarterly reports, he'd know we'd already implemented a hybrid architecture years ago, one specifically designed to protect client data during outages. "I understand. Thank you for the opportunity to have served Aurora Grid for so long." I stood up, extending my hand. "I wish you all the best." Bryce seemed momentarily thrown by my calm acceptance. He'd clearly expected tears, perhaps anger or pleading. Instead, he got a firm handshake and a polite smile. As I walked out of his office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for what I was leaving behind, anger at the callousness of my dismissal, but also an odd sense of anticipation. They didn't know what they didn't know, and I had built this system to survive anything, except perhaps the arrogance of those who didn't understand it. I cleared out my desk methodically, carefully packing 18 years of memories into a single cardboard box. Family photos, my collection of programming language mugs, and the small plaque Jake had given me on our 10th anniversary. To Denise, the code whisperer who makes the impossible possible. Jake had sold his stake 5 years ago when venture capital came knocking. He'd made millions and moved to Arizona, leaving me as the last original employee. He'd called to warn me when he heard about the new CEO. "Watch your back, Denise," he'd said. "This guy Bryce is known for clean slate management. New broom sweeps clean and all that." I should have listened more carefully. Looking around the open office space, I spotted Tim Chen, my lead developer, watching me with undisguised shock. I motioned him over. "They're letting you go?" he whispered, glancing nervously toward the executive suite. "That's insane. Nobody knows the infrastructure like you do." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll figure it out. Just remember what I always say about the primary server cluster. Never update without running the diagnostic sequence first," he finished automatically. "But Denise, the authentication protocols, the recovery procedures, they're all documented," I said smoothly, "in the system." This wasn't entirely true. The documentation existed, but access required a specific sequence of credentials that only I possessed. It was a security measure I'd implemented years ago after a disgruntled employee had attempted to sabotage our backup systems. "I'll be fine, Tim. Change is part of growth." I handed him a sticky note with my personal email. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." I made my way through the office, saying quiet goodbyes to colleagues I'd mentored and worked alongside for years. Most were stunned, a few angry on my behalf. I maintained my composure, refusing to give Bryce or the executive team the satisfaction of seeing me break. On my way out, I stopped by Melissa Winter's desk. As head of human resources, she'd been the one to schedule my sudden meeting with Bryce. "I've processed your paperwork," she said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm sorry about this, Denise. It wasn't my decision." "I know." I smiled gently. "Just one question. Who's taking over the security protocols for the main server cluster?" "I think they're bringing in a new team from Pinnacle Consulting." She frowned. "Why do you ask?" I shrugged, adjusting the box in my arms. "Just curious. Change is good, right? That's what everyone keeps saying." As I walked through the glass doors of Aurora Grid Technologies for what might be the last time, I felt oddly light. 18 years was a long time to give to one company, and maybe, just maybe, it was time for something new. The first week of unemployment was disorienting. For nearly 2 decades, my alarm had gone off at exactly 5:30 a.m., and I'd been at my desk by 7, running diagnostics before most of my colleagues had even poured their first cup of coffee. Now, I found myself adrift in a sea of unstructured time. I spent the first few days updating my resume and LinkedIn profile, surprised to see dozens of messages from former colleagues expressing their shock and support. Several offered to refer me to positions at their new companies, but I wasn't ready to jump into anything yet. Financially, I was stable. I'd always lived below my means and had significant savings. On the 8th day after my dismissal, I received an email from Tim. "Denise, hope you're doing well. Things are chaotic here. The Pinnacle consultants are reviewing the entire infrastructure and making recommendations. They're talking about a complete system overhaul next month. Yesterday they mentioned deprecating your backup protocols as legacy systems. I tried to explain their importance, but I'm being sidelined. Miss your guidance, Tim." I crafted a careful response, advising him to document his concerns in writing while navigating the politics of the new regime. I didn't mention that deprecating my backup systems without understanding them first would be like removing the foundation of a building to modernize it. 2 days later, I received another message, this time from Alicia Gonzalez, the project manager for our largest client, Meridian Healthcare. "Denise, this is unofficial, but I wanted to give you a heads up. The migration team is planning to update the main server cluster next week. When I asked about the diagnostic sequence you always insisted on, they said it was unnecessary overhead and that their new continuous deployment pipeline would handle any issues automatically. I have a bad feeling about this. Best, Alicia." My stomach tightened. The diagnostic sequence wasn't just a cautious habit, it was essential. Our main cluster had specialized hardware configurations that required specific pre-checks before any system updates. Skipping them was like jumping out of an airplane without checking your parachute first. I considered reaching out to Bryce or the CTO to warn them, but pride held me back. They'd made it clear that my expertise was no longer valued. They'd chosen to dismiss nearly 2 decades of institutional knowledge without so much as a transition meeting. That night, I went through my home office, finding the encrypted hard drive where I kept backups of all my system documentation, including the detailed recovery protocols I'd developed. The procedures were complex by design, requiring specific authentication steps that only I knew by heart. I stared at the drive for a long moment, then placed it in my desk drawer. "They wanted fresh perspectives," I said to the empty room. "They'll get them." 2 days later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I received an urgent text from Tim. "Everything's down. Complete system failure. No one knows what to do." And so it began. The main server cluster crashed at approximately 3 a.m., Tim explained breathlessly over the phone. It was during the scheduled update window, but something went catastrophically wrong. The automated recovery systems couldn't initialize, and now we're in full disaster mode. I had just finished my morning coffee when he called, my phone buzzing with an emergency alert I'd set up years ago, one tied to our server monitoring systems. Old habits die hard. What about the backup protocols? I asked, already knowing the answer. Tim's bitter laugh confirmed my suspicions. That's the thing. The documentation for the recovery process requires authentication credentials that none of us have. It's like trying to open a vault without the combination. I'd designed it that way deliberately. After a security breach 7 years ago, I'd implemented a layered authentication system, one that required physical access to certain terminals, specific credential sequences, and knowledge that wasn't stored in any accessible repository. It was old-school security by obscurity, updated for the modern era. What's the client impact? I asked, setting down my mug. Total. Meridian Healthcare's patient portal is down. Reynolds Financial can't access any of their transaction data. Even our internal systems are paralyzed. Email, development environments, everything. Tim lowered his voice. Bryce is having a complete meltdown. The board called an emergency meeting for noon. I felt a twinge of sympathy for my former colleagues, but it was overshadowed by a sense of validation. This was precisely the scenario I'd warned about for years. The reason I ran exhaustive diagnostics before every update. The reason I'd created redundant systems and recovery protocols. Has anyone reached out to me officially? I asked. Not yet, Tim replied. But they will. No one else understands how to recover from this kind of failure. The Pinnacle consultants are completely out of their depth. As if on cue, my phone beeped with an incoming call. Melissa from HR. I should go, Tim. Keep me posted. I switched calls. Hello, Melissa. Denise, she began, her voice strained. I hope you're doing well. I'm calling because we have a situation at Aurora Grid. I've heard, I replied neutrally. We need your help. The server cluster is down and we can't access the recovery systems. The technical team suggested that you might be the only person who knows how to resolve this. I remained silent, letting the moment stretch uncomfortably. Denise, are you there? I'm here, Melissa. I'm just surprised to hear from Aurora Grid so soon. I was under the impression that my knowledge was obsolete, that fresh perspectives were what the company needed. To her credit, Melissa didn't attempt to sugarcoat the situation. Things have changed rapidly in the past few hours. Would you be willing to come in and help us resolve this crisis? We would compensate you for your time, of course. I see. And who authorized this outreach? Bryce himself, and the board chair, Eleanor Vance. I allowed myself a small smile. I'm not available to come in today, but I can assist remotely. However, I will need to send over a consulting agreement first. My standard rate is $300 per hour, with a minimum engagement of 10 hours. I heard Melissa's sharp intake of breath, 3 times my former hourly compensation. I'll need to get approval for... Of course, I interrupted gently. Take all the time you need. Meanwhile, I suggest implementing the emergency containment protocol to prevent further data corruption. Tim knows the process. After ending the call, I opened my laptop and began drafting a consulting agreement, laying out my terms clearly. 20 minutes later, my email pinged with a message from Eleanor Vance herself. Denise, terms accepted. Contract attached with signatures. Please help us resolve this crisis as soon as possible. Eleanor Vance, Board Chair. Aurora Grid Technologies. I signed the agreement, setting it aside with a sense of satisfaction before grabbing my emergency kit and laptop. It was time to rescue the company that no longer needed me. I didn't go to the office. Instead, I set up at my home workspace and established a secure remote connection to Aurora Grid systems. The situation was even worse than Tim had described. The failed update had triggered a cascading failure that corrupted critical system files, and the recovery systems were locked behind multiple authentication barriers that I had designed years ago. My phone rang constantly. First the CTO, then various team leads, all desperate for immediate solutions. I responded to each with the same calm message. I was working on it, and I would provide updates through official channels only. At 2 p.m., my doorbell rang. To my surprise, Bryce Lambert himself stood on my porch, looking considerably less polished than when he'd fired me. His normally perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled. "Denise," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to help us. I thought it might be more efficient if we worked together in person." I regarded him for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. "You could have called first." "I tried. You didn't answer. I was busy trying to save your company." In my home office, I showed him the diagnostic screens displaying the extent of the damage. To his credit, Bryce seemed to grasp the severity of the situation quickly. "How long until we're back online?" he asked, the desperation evident in his voice. "The recovery process has multiple phases," I explained. "Each requires specific authentication and verification steps. If everything goes perfectly, we might have basic services restored by tomorrow morning and full recovery within 48 hours. Bryce paled. 48 hours? That's unacceptable. Our clients should have been informed immediately about the outage and given realistic timeframes for resolution, I finished for him. "This isn't a simple reboot, Bryce. Your team attempted a complete system update without running the required diagnostics. They bypassed critical safety protocols that would have prevented this disaster." "Your protocols," he muttered, a hint of accusation in his tone. "Yes, my protocols. The ones I developed and refined over 18 years to protect the company from exactly this kind of catastrophic failure." I turned to face him fully. "The ones that were dismissed as legacy systems by consultants who've been with the company for less than a month." A flash of anger crossed his face, quickly replaced by pragmatic desperation. "What do you need from me to expedite this process?" "Nothing. I've already initiated the first phase of recovery." I gestured to my screens. "But there's something you should know. The board has reached out to me separately." This caught his attention. "What do you mean?" "Eleanor Vance called me while you were on your way here. The board is concerned about how this situation was allowed to happen. They've asked me to provide a full assessment of the infrastructure decisions made since my departure." It wasn't entirely true. Eleanor had texted asking for updates, but hadn't requested an assessment. Yet. Bryce's expression hardened. "I see. I'm not interested in office politics, Bryce. I'm here to restore the systems and protect the data integrity for our clients. That's all." "Our clients," he repeated softly. "You still think of them as yours?" 18 years create strong bonds," I replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to continue the recovery process. I'll send hourly updates to you and the board." As Bryce left, I returned to my work, systematically addressing each corrupted system. My phone buzzed with a text from Tim. "Bryce just announced that all Pinnacle consultants have been placed on leave pending review. What did you say to him?" I didn't respond. There would be time for conversations later. Right now, I had a company to save, whether they appreciated it or not. By midnight, I had managed to restore the authentication systems and begin the data recovery process. My eyes burned from staring at screens, but I felt a familiar satisfaction as each system gradually came back online. This was the work I had always excelled at, solving complex problems under pressure, making order from chaos. At 2 a.m., as I was finalizing the recovery sequence for the client portals, my phone rang. It was Eleanor Vance. "Denise, I cannot thank you enough for stepping in," she said without preamble. "The board has been receiving your updates. Your progress is remarkable." "Thank you, Eleanor. The critical system should be operational by morning, though full data validation will take another day." There was a pause before she continued. "Denise, I've been reviewing the decisions made over the past few weeks. The board was not fully informed about the extent of the changes being implemented, particularly regarding the core infrastructure you designed." I kept my voice neutral. "I'm focusing on the recovery right now, Eleanor. We can discuss management decisions after the crisis is resolved." "Of course," she agreed. but I want you to know that the board recognizes the value of your expertise. We would like to discuss a more permanent arrangement once this situation is stabilized." After ending the call, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. In just 3 weeks, the company had gone from dismissing me as obsolete to desperately needing my expertise. It was validation, certainly, but also a stark reminder of the tech industry's short-sightedness when it came to experience versus trends. The next morning, I arrived at the Aurora Grid offices shortly after dawn. The atmosphere was tense, clusters of employees whispering in corners, the executive suite conspicuously empty. Tim met me at the door, relief evident on his face. "You're a miracle worker," he said, falling into step beside me. "The main customer portals are back online, and we've received confirmation that no data was lost." "Not a miracle," I corrected him. "Just proper system design and recovery protocols." In the conference room, I found the executive team and several board members gathered around the table. Bryce sat at the far end, his expression unreadable as I entered. Eleanor Vance rose to greet me. "Denise, thank you for coming in. We've been reviewing the preliminary damage assessment." I connected my laptop to the room's display, bringing up a detailed analysis of the system's failure and recovery process. As you can see, the cascade was triggered by an unauthorized update procedure that bypassed essential diagnostic protocols. Had these protocols been followed, the system would have flagged potential conflicts before implementation. For the next hour, I walked them through the technical details, explaining in terms they could understand why the failure had occurred and how similar disasters could be prevented. I concluded with a series of recommendations for immediate implementation. When I finished, Eleanor spoke first. "What would it take to bring you back, Denise? Not just as a consultant, but in a leadership role. Director of Infrastructure Security, perhaps?" Before I could respond, Bryce interjected. "With all due respect, we need to consider the modernization initiatives. While Denise's experience is valuable, our strategic direction lost us millions in potential revenue and damaged client relationships," Eleanor finished firmly. "The strategy needs reassessment, Bryce." The tension in the room was palpable. I closed my laptop, considering my next words carefully. This was the moment of leverage I hadn't sought, but now possessed completely. "I'm not interested in returning as an employee," I said finally, "but I am willing to negotiate a consulting arrangement with specific conditions." All eyes turned to me, waiting. I had their complete attention, and for the first time in my career, I had the upper hand. It was time to use it. 3 days after the system crash, I sat across from Eleanor Vance and the board's attorney, finalizing the terms of my consulting agreement. The document before me represented not just a professional victory, but a personal vindication. "To summarize," the attorney said, reviewing the key points, "Aurora Grid Technologies will retain your services as principal infrastructure consultant for a minimum of 6 months at your stated rate of $300 per hour. You'll maintain your independent status while overseeing the reconstruction of the security architecture and training of internal staff." Eleanor added, "And as discussed, the board has approved the formal acknowledgement of your original system architecture, with full attribution in all technical documentation and client materials." I nodded, scanning the final page of the agreement. "And the letter?" "Has been drafted as requested," Eleanor confirmed, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside was a formal apology from the board, acknowledging my contributions to Aurora Grid and expressing regret for the manner of my dismissal. It wasn't legally binding, more a matter of personal satisfaction, but it mattered to me. "Then we have an agreement," I said, signing the final page. "I'll begin the comprehensive security audit tomorrow." As we concluded the meeting, Eleanor walked me to the elevator. "Between us, Bryce has been placed on administrative leave pending review. His decision to bypass established protocols without proper understanding of the consequences was illuminating for the board." I maintained a neutral expression. Companies often confuse innovation with abandonment of fundamental principles. The best technological solutions build upon proven foundations, rather than discarding them entirely. Eleanor studied me with newfound respect. You know, Denise, in all the years you worked here, I don't think leadership ever truly appreciated what they had in you. That's often the case with infrastructure, I replied as the elevator arrived. Nobody notices it until it fails. I left the building not as a defeated former employee, but as a consultant whose expertise now commanded respect and compensation commensurate with its true value. Over the following weeks, I worked with Tim and a small team of senior developers to rebuild and strengthen Aurora Grid's systems. I documented everything meticulously this time, creating comprehensive training materials that explained not just the how, but the why behind critical security protocols. The Pinnacle consultants were gone. Their contracts terminated after the board's investigation revealed they had misrepresented their expertise in legacy system integration. Their modernization proposals would have eventually undermined the very foundations that had made Aurora Grid's services reliable and secure for nearly 2 decades. 1 month after the crash, Alicia invited me to lunch at a small cafe near the office. "The clients are calling you the server whisperer," she said, smiling. "Meridian Healthcare specifically requested that you personally oversee their next system upgrade." Ironic, I mused, stirring my tea. A month ago, I was deemed obsolete. "Experience never goes out of style in this industry," Alicia replied. "Not really. Companies just periodically forget that fact until reality reminds them." When I returned to the office, I found Tim working with a young developer I didn't recognize. "Denise, this is Jason," Tim introduced us. "He's joining the infrastructure security team." Jason looked barely out of college, with bright eyes and that particular eagerness of someone with more theoretical knowledge than practical experience. "It's an honor to meet you, Ms. Halbrook," he said, extending his hand. "Your work on the distributed authentication system is brilliant." I shook his hand, suppressing a smile at being called Ms. Halbrook for the first time in my career. "Thank you, Jason, and please, call me Denise." As we walked to the server room, I realized something had fundamentally changed, not just in my professional status, but in my own perception of my value. I hadn't needed to fight for recognition. I simply needed to let reality do that for me. My presence now commanded the respect I had always deserved, but rarely received. The very systems I had built, which had been dismissed as outdated, had proven themselves more resilient and essential than anyone anticipated. They hadn't failed the company. Poor leadership had failed them. As I watched Jason and Tim collaborate on implementing one of my security protocols, I felt a sense of satisfaction that transcended mere revenge. I had built something lasting, something valuable. And now, finally, everyone knew it. I would continue to share my knowledge, but on my terms, with proper recognition and compensation. The next generation deserved to understand that innovation wasn't about discarding the past, but building thoughtfully upon it. In the end, I hadn't needed to orchestrate an elaborate revenge. I simply had to wait for reality to vindicate what I had known all along. Expertise, earned through years of hands-on problem-solving, would always prove its worth in a crisis. And now, everyone at Aurora Grid Technologies understood that too. The greatest revenge wasn't bringing the company to its knees. It was watching them finally recognize the value they had so carelessly discarded.